Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at several short stories from the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. This is number 7 of the Freak Brothers comics. We got Gilbert Shelton joined by both Dave Sheridan and Paul Mavrides in the same issue. Unfortunately, this is the last issue Dave Sheridan contributed to. He died of a brain hemorrhage in 1982. That's when this comic came out. Really young. Fucking shame. I mean, Dave Sheridan, one of the greats of the underground comics field, any comics field. I mean, he was up there with any comics great. Just an amazing artist. So this is some of the last stuff we get to see by him, unfortunately. Nice zany cover by Shelton. And I should have looked it up. I think it's Sheridan inking. Or Mavrides. I don't know. Actually, I can tell it's Sheridan by that. But who knows? Maybe Mavrides helped him out too. Inside front cover, we got a one-pager. And they got these gray tones going on in some of these strips now. I assume that's Dave Sheridan's doing. But, because, you know, that guy just was a master of technique. A little fun gag. We have a first story, The Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, and Burned Again by Shelton and Mavrides. As we can, if you notice, Mavrides kind of stays closer to Shelton's pencils. Sheridan, when he, like, inks Shelton, he turns the faces of the people into Dave Sheridan faces. But this pretty much just looks like Shelton with a very, like, tight line, which Mavrides was kind of known for. So Fat Freddy finds a canister near the nuclear power plant and brings it home. Him and Franklin are trying to crack it open, being like, hey, there's something inside. Maybe it's valuable. I mean, I can't believe they're that dumb, but I guess they are. If you smoke that much weed for 20 years, you're not going to be too bright, I guess. So Franklin comes in and says, what are you doing? Cut it out. That's radioactive. So he has a homemade Geiger counter he made, and luckily nothing spilled from it. There's no leakage of radiation. So they're trying to figure out what to do with it. And they're thinking about selling it, all these different things. But then they just realize we should just give it to the authorities. It's too dangerous. Meanwhile, Fat Freddy's in a bathtub with bleach and Chinese mustard, thinking that he got dosed with radiation, trying to cleanse himself. So meanwhile, in the Federal Atomic Regulatory Task Force, I guess they've been losing canisters all over, like 33 this month, I think they say. And but this one, for some reason, is important. The one that Fat Freddy has. So this task force, they send him out to find the canister and bring it back. Franklin and Phineas call up the Department of the Interior. And it's a super liberal guy named Brack Blither. And he's like, okay, meet me in this alley. As if it's some drug deal or something. He really isn't even supposed to be dealing with this. But Brock Blither, he wants to embarrass the Nuclear Regulatory Committee. So he's going to, basically find the nuclear canister, supposedly find it, and alert the media so he could be the big hero of the day. Phineas and Franklin disguise the plutonium canister in a bale of hay, and they drive out to the rendezvous point. Meanwhile, Fat Freddy feels sick. It's kind of psychosomatic. And when he calls the ambulance, the Nuclear Regulatory Committee comes, and they get him to spill the beans about where Franklin and Phineas are heading. So it turns out regulatory task force, nuclear regulatory task force, has this total feud with Blither because he's a liberal, and also he ratted them out at some budget hearings a few years back. So they're like, oh, we're going to capture him with the plutonium, and he's going to be in trouble. We'll show him. And here we see Brock on his way to meet the Freak Brothers. He's got a bicycle on his VW sedan, so you know he's a liberal. I like this. He has this little fantasy about how famous and rich he's going to get from selling the book rights. And I like this in his fantasy. This is how he sees himself. As this good-looking, thin guy, even though he looks like a mutant toad or something. He's pretty ugly-looking dude. So the nuclear task force are staking out the rendezvous point. Meanwhile, Franklin and Phineas, they tell this speed freak friend of theirs, they tell him what they have in the bale. The bale of hay. And he says, I'll give you twice of what the reward that Brock was going to give you. And they're like, sure, we'll sell it to you. So when they see Brock go into this ice cream shop, he's just going in to get some ice cream because he's a big fat guy who likes food. And I'm saying that as a big fat guy who likes food. The ice cream man happens to follow right behind him with, a canister of ice cream. So the task force is like, let's get him. They think it's the transactions going down. Meanwhile, Fat Freddy escapes from his, he's still got his street jacket on. He's running down the street. Back at the ice cream store, they surround the ice cream guy. Of course, it's just ice cream inside. But they think it's some weird kind of radioactive melted purple stuff, even though it's just ice cream that's melted. I love this lettering here. That's really great. It's a great panel. Just them running out of the ice cream store. They demolish it. They're like hightailing it so fast because they're trying to get away from the radioactive material. That's a great panel, though. Just total chaos. So Fat Freddy shows up. He made this homemade radioactive suit with a snorkel and some various shit. He looks ridiculous. I forgot to mention that their old nemesis, Norbert, now works for the nuclear task force. He's not really important to the plot, but every now and then they're like, Norbert, go get us some coffee. So they realize, they feel a little guilty that they gave that plutonium to that speed freak. And they're like, maybe we should check on him and see what he did with it. And he's like, oh, I thought you guys said platinum. I made these Ronald Reagan medallions and sold them at the shopping mall. And a lot of the guys at the nuclear task force bought some of these things. And the supervisor's like, we're not allowed to wear political pins. Hand it over. So they're probably all going to die of cancer. The end. It's a crazy little story. We got a little one-pager here. Freak Brothers play the market. The dialogue on this is by Dom Baumgart, and the art is by all three of them. Sheridan Mavrita is helping out Shelton. So they need some money to pay their rent. And Franklin knows this old ex-hippie drug dealer who is now pretty big on Wall Street. I like this when they go to the stock exchange. There's this like Mammon, the god of greed and wealth or whatever. So they find Megaton Wally. And he's like, I just sell drugs to all these stockbrokers. They all need cocaine. And then at the end of the day, they all need lewds to come down. That's how I made my money. Definitely another strip showing the changing times. So it's 1982 now. A lot of hippies had become yuppies. And, just try to make a lot of money instead of giving a shit about politics and their fellow man. But of course, the Freak Brothers are pretty much the same. They haven't changed at all. Another nice logo for this one-pager. Oh, this is actually commenting on the slasher movie fad. And Fat Freddy goes to a horror film festival. I love this. One of them is called My Bloody Underwear. So he's not impressed with these slasher movies. He's like, I could write a better movie than that. All I need is some speed. So he snorts tons of speed and stays up all night typing away. The next morning, it's just pages and pages of, and then they went, and then they went, and then they went. And the guys make fun of him. They're like, it's a horror movie, all right. We could call it Crankenstein. How about Gertrude Stein? And Freddy is just speed, and I like the way they draw Freddy wigging out. This one is also all three of the artists, as is the next story. I think this next one is a reprint from Ripoff Comics. So, Phineas gets an abortion. It's a pretty nutty story. You can really see a lot of Sheridan faces in this. Like, that's Sheridan. That looks just like Sheridan. Notice that she's got like the Farrah Fawcett do, which I would think in 1982 was already passé. But I imagine Gilbert Shelton wasn't keeping abreast of mainstream hairstyles. So Phineas has got this girlfriend. They're at the free clinic, and she says the tests were positive. And it's going to be a boy that looks just like you. I guess the tests were getting better, the pregnancy tests, or whatever you call it. So Phineas is totally into it. He's like, you can move in with me. And she's like, oh, that sounds great. We'll have a natural childbirth in your apartment, which actually sounds like a really bad idea. So she goes to tell her parents, and she's some rich girl. And when she, 5 minutes later, the father comes running out with a pistol, screaming. So Phineas hightails it out of there. And then another thing about how times have changed. He's like, ooh, I knew I'd be asking for trouble falling in love with a 16-year-old. So she's only 16. So later that evening, she waltzes in through the door of the Freak Brothers apartment. I kind of thought this was interesting here. There's a giant Japanese robot, like Mazinger type thing on the wall. That was just odd that Gilbert Shelton would know about that, subculture. So she says, I've changed my mind about having the baby. My father gave me like $20,000 so I can go to those rich doctors that'll perform abortions and keep it quiet. And Phineas doesn't like it. He's just like, but the baby's going to look just like me, remember? We can't kill it. So Phineas says, you can keep the money. I can get you a way cheaper abortion than that. Of course, it's this crazy guy, Chamberlain Killpig. And he's kind of like this mad genius. And he informs them like, oh, you guys are so behind the times. Abortion isn't even necessary anymore. We can take the fetus out of you and give it to someone else, and they can grow it inside their womb. In fact, if it's going to be a boy, even Phineas can do it with my artificial womb that I invented. So Phineas agrees to do it. There's some obvious, like, Shelton and Marita's noodling. That's some really elaborate tech stuff drawn in there. So they do the operation. Phineas has got a big zipper because obviously he won't be able to give birth to it the natural way. So they're all happy that they got $20,000 that they don't have to spend on this fancy abortion. But then Phineas is, he's like the mom. He's like, oh, we have to buy a a sterilizer and a bottle warmer and all this stuff for the baby. And that goes through almost all the money. So months pass. Phineas is full on pregnant. Basically, the doctor just said, just you'll feel it when they're ready to come out, and then you just pull down the zipper, but just don't do it before then. So apparently, when he goes back to Dr. Killpig to find out if it's time yet, he's gone. His whole building has been torn down by the DEA. So he realizes it's been 14 months. He's had this inside of him. So he says, I better pull the zipper now. And he pulls the zipper down. And like 100 of these little Phineases come down. I love the manic way he draws these crazy guys. They're all just running around naked, freaking out. And they say, quick, lock the doors. We can't let any of them escape. But then they all band together and start calling them bourgeois pigs. And babies have rights like everyone else. Death to tyrants. And they start attacking them. But then Phineas goes nuts. There's a shovel there, and he starts killing them all. He's like, you're not going to overwhelm me. And everyone's freaking out. They're like, oh my God, he's killing them. Because, Phineas, if you remember, he's a total pacifist. As you can imagine by this zany story, of course, it's a dream. And his girlfriend wakes him up. And she says, hey, we have to go to the free clinic. And she comes out and says, I'm pregnant. And Phineas says, oh, nothing to worry about. I've been through this all before. And it turns out to be a dream. And so on, it says. So it's a little loop. Here's a goofy story. This is Gilbert Shelton's solo, where Freddy comes home hungry one night and sees this, egg, soft-boiled egg in a jar. So he pours it in the pan, and it won't fry. He just keeps heating it. He assumes the oven's broken. And then the next morning, Phineas says, you must have been really drunk last night because you tried to fry this apricot. It says thanks to Don Byron here, so I assume this is some anecdote that Gilbert Shelton just illustrated. Some hippie friend probably did that once. Another one of those nice duotone comics. Shelton and Mavrides. So maybe I was wrong about Sheridan. Maybe it's Mavrides also does the duotone. Really good, in the scene where they're kind of transported to Thailand. Just a really amazing layered effect with the grays and the blacks shading. Little gag. Oh man, I love this one. The Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers come down. This is by all three of the guys. So one day, just like every other day, the Freak Brothers are about to, they wake up and they're about to get high. Wake and bake. Phineas gets an idea. He says, guys, we've gotten stoned every morning since 1967. Let's try something different. What if we don't get stoned? Maybe it'd be like a total different kind of high. And it's free. So the guys agree. Okay, watch carefully. And, of course, they're just sitting there. They got nothing else to do. And they're drawn more and more realistically. And then look at this. I hope this shows up okay on the camera. Oh, I'll keep it there. This looks really good. You know, obviously, before any computer stuff, it's just they took photos and retouched them. So, without pot, you know, they're in reality. Or, like, real reality, almost. It's really well done. It kind of looks like some weird photo. Of course, they don't know what to do with themselves. Without weed, they're not even that hungry. They start noticing things they never noticed, like how bad the dishes smell and all the stains on the wall. Even Fat Freddy Cat shows up. Fat Freddy keeps saying, I don't feel any different. And he also is like less photographic than they are. It's long panels of them just kind of sitting there going, hiccup, belch, fart. And then finally, 2 more panels of the same. They're just sitting there bored. They're like, I can't stand this another minute. Me either. And they eat, snort, and smoke all the drugs they have. And they're back. I love that panel. And they walk off into the sunset. And they say, ooh, for a minute there, I thought we were going to have to wash those dishes. That's one of my favorite ones. Oh, this is a great one, too. The Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers of the 21st Century. It's by all 3 of the guys. He really shows a lot of detail in this crazy futuristic city. So the Freak Brothers haven't changed. It's 2003, I think. Yeah. And they're like, hey, we got to get some drugs. Of course, Franklin orders Freddy to do it like he always does. And he says, I wouldn't last 5 minutes on the street. So I guess crime's gotten worse in this future. And he's like, well, take the car. They're like, the car? So I guess they've had a car in the parking garage in the basement since 1984. And it still works. Of course, their parking tab is $370 million plus. And Phineas luckily has $1 billion bill in his purse. I guess all the money's very tiny back then, so he loses it, it falls. So Franklin's like, yeah, I'm just going to bust out of here. It's just, the gate's made of plastic anyway. So they're driving to Peeville. That's where Country Cow Freak lives, their cousin. And of course, everything's been built up around his little country mansion. He just has this little yard. So he grows all of the plants in his basement. I like this. He's got bonsai sensimillas to save space. So he gives him a plant, says, hey guys, this will give you pot for years and years if you just, put light on it, a light bulb on it. So the more things change, the more things stay the same. As they're driving home, a cop car starts using a siren, and they're like, oh shit. So they've got this old, 1955 Chevrolet. All the other cars are these dinky little one-man vehicles. So they just drive over everyone else. And then Phineas says, oh no, they must have radioed in. Cop cars are dropping out of the sky up ahead. They're like parachuting down these little tiny cop cars. So the cops stop them and they trank them with these darts that have heroin and thorazine in them. And they're all zonked out. And then Phineas wakes up and says, ooh, what a dream. What year is this? And Franklin's all like, 1982. What are you, psychotic? I don't understand this, though. Why Phineas is turned into some, weird alien. Maybe I'm just dense. Oh, this is a fun one. Adventures of Fat Freddy's Cat. Solo Shelton. And he's reading the comic strips in the paper. And he's just like, oh man, these comics are just terrible nowadays. We got Mike Gonad Mary Worthless. 3 panels of Mary Worthless in bed. And he says, Mary Worthless was a lot more interesting before she had her stroke. We got a parody of Doonesbury. I can't even remember what this comic was called. The one about the Foreign Legion guys. They call it Crank. There's some name like Kronk or something. Randy Crap. And they show Andy Cap as being a total just piece of shit. And then an IRA guy tosses him a bomb. And he says, I'm a misogynist, not an imperialist. And peanuts. They actually are peanuts. And this giant hand comes down and eats them. But he says there's a new comic strip called Barfield. So I guess Garfield was kind of new then. So he's doing a satire of that. I like how he says, this cat seems to have a severe case of goiter. Because the way he draws, Jim Davis draws Garfield. He says the only thing comics are good for is to fall asleep under the newspaper. So he has a dream where he goes to comic strip heaven. And we see Fritz the cat, Crazy Cat, Pink Panther, Felix the cat, and I love this B Club Band's cat up in the corner. And Fat Freddy's overjoyed. He's like, oh, it's my favorite cartoon cats are here, and there's no humans. This really is heaven. And then meanwhile, Phineas asks Freddy, he's like, I haven't seen your cat in several days. And Freddy says, he always comes back. He leaves for a week sometimes. And Fat Freddy's cat, that's what you think, Fat Freddy. The end. And he's just dancing up there with all the other cats. Man, this is such fun cartooning. I just love looking at these pages. Funny little gag strip. Another one. And here, I think this is from Ripoff Comics, because I remember reading this before. The Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers Knock 'Em Dead. It's by the 3 guys. So, it's 1982, so Gilbert Shelton is hip to the jive with this punk thing. He was living in San Francisco, I think, at the time, so he probably saw all these punk bands. And I think Gilbert Shelton is kind of sympathetic to the punk rockers, because, like, he even made a comic in the late 80s or in early 90s about a punk band. I think they were called Not Quite Dead, was the name of the comic. He just wrote it. A French artist named Pique drew it. But he also does not think much of the genre of punk. Like, he makes all the typical jokes like, oh, if you don't need to learn how to play your instruments to play punk. And the worse it sounds, the better it is. There's some really nice body language here. This crazy guy. Almost looks like something like early Peter Bagg. Just really weird, crazy character design. So the Freak Brothers are not impressed with punk either. And they're like, Fat Freddy says, we could play better than that. And they think about all the fame and fortune and drugs they'll get if they become rock stars. So they go home. They make all these crazy instruments. They get all these crazy clothing because they don't want to look like a bunch of old hippies. They want to look punk. Phineas makes a suit out of garbage bags. Franklin trades a wino for his nasty jacket. It's all stinky. So they get a show at the local cool club. They're billed as the Freaks. Look at these crazy punk rockers. I don't even know what the hell they're supposed to be. They look like people from the future. So they get to use all the equipment of the band that canceled that night. They got like all this great equipment. And I guess the sound engineer, he called in sick too. So the guy just goes out to the crowd and says, anybody here know about sound engineering? And of course, all these punks are like, yeah, me, I do. So he picks one guy who knows nothing about sound. Franklin brought a wire mattress. He's going to wire it and mic it for sound. So they start playing, and it's just an ungodly racket. Squawk, blonk, blah, clang, eek, squeal. And the crowd likes it. But then they start to twitch and convulse. There's this, like, horrible sound. And the Freak Brothers misinterpret the crowd's reaction. So they're like, turn it up. And then all of a sudden, they're like, the crowd has really gone quiet. And the sound guy, he hightails it out of here. He fucked up. So apparently what happened is that the mattress, the bed spring, it generated all this microwave energy. Because there was so much sound or energy wired through it. And it fried the whole crowd. Luckily, the freaks were behind it. It was directional. So they're okay. So they're like, oh man, this is harder than it looks. And they give up on being a band. The punchline is that for weeks, nobody ever heard of the freaks again. Nobody knew who they were. But for weeks and months afterwards, an army of recording execs, contracts in hand, searched for many for a long time. So apparently they became a legend. Here's a little Fat Freddy demonstrates how to use rolling papers. Pretty funny stuff. Fun little gag. Another one of those duotone strips. And this just says copyright Gilbert Shelton, but I don't know. It looks like Mavrides helped him again with the duotone. I don't know if Gilbert Shelton did that on his own. Here we are. I really like this back cover. On the Wheel of Karma with the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. And on this merry-go-round, the cops are chasing them. Even Fat Freddy's cat is on a little goose here. And this is Gilbert Shelton solo, 1980, it says. So maybe this was done for something else. It could have been a poster. I did want to point out, this one, by the way, is 1979, so some of these are a little older. So there you go. Basically number 7 of the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. I really like this issue. It's a really fun one. And once again, impeccable cartooning. And not just because of Shelton, but thanks to Sheridan Mavrides. Once again, I'm so bummed Sheridan's not going to be around anymore. And it's sad the guy died so young. But maybe next time we start the long-form stories. We'll find out. I thought it was number 7, actually. But this was a damn enjoyable issue. But like I've said many times before, Gilbert Shelton really shines when he tells those epic tales. And I'm looking forward to it. Hope you enjoyed today's video. And I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.